The fourth morning began with a single word. Gear up. Inigo stood in the center of camp, backlit by the fire pit's dying embers, his voice clear but low. It was still early, gray mist drifted along the field, but the recruits were already moving. Armor was buckled, rifles checked, magazines inspected. No one asked what they were doing. They didn't need to. They'd learned by now. Form 2 squads, Inigo ordered. Saber and Viper. Hal and Brenna lead. You'll rotate through roles every drill. Lyra stood beside him, holding a rolled parchment that she unraveled like a battle map. Today you'll run convoy drills, she announced. 2 JLTVs. One in front, one behind. Inside your squad. On the road, hostile terrain. At any point we'll signal an ambush. When that happens your response must be immediate. Fire back, dismount, secure wounded and clear the path. She let the parchment drop to her side. There will be no warning. No fixed targets. And no room for hesitation. The recruits stiffened. Instructor, Fern asked, lifting a hand. What if we're hit inside the vehicle? Then you die, Inigo said flatly. Fern's mouth shut. Lyra mercifully added, not literally. But yes, in the drill, you'll be considered out of action. They broke off into squads. Brenna's team took the lead vehicle. Hal's rode in the rear. Inigo personally inspected the JLTVs before starting the drill. He walked around the first vehicle, tapping the mounted brace for the rear gunners, then crouched to check the tire treads. Everything was intact. Engines purred low, awaiting command. He gave a sharp nod. Go. The vehicles rolled forward in a slow, steady column. Hal drove with a controlled pace, keeping even spacing between the JLTVs as they entered the marked woodland trail. The trees thickened as they moved deeper and sunlight dappled the muddy path ahead. Inside the lead vehicle, Brenna sat in the passenger seat, rifle balanced across her lap. Eyes open, she said. They said no warning. Fern in the rear left seat muttered, What's the signal? Before anyone could answer, a flare of red smoke burst from the side of the trail. A loud bang followed, echoing like a detonation. Ambush! Brenna shouted. Dismount. Now. The JLTV skidded to a halt. Doors burst open. Fern and Merrill jumped from the rear, rifles raised, immediately taking cover behind the wheel well. Brenna ducked beneath the open door and returned fire toward the smoke, where paper targets had sprung up on hidden wires. In the second JLTV, Hal shouted, Form wedge. Cover the front. Sark and Leo dismounted and fanned out on the right, opening fire at staggered targets placed in the tree line. Paint rounds cracked through the air, slapping targets with red. Medic. Lyra's voice rang out from a distance, simulating an injured soldier. We've got a wounded inside vehicle 1. Merrill, still panting, turned to Fern. You cover, I'll drag. She rushed to the passenger side, where a dummy in armor had been laid across the front seat. Without hesitating, she gripped it under the arms and pulled it out while Brenna covered her, pivoting left and firing short bursts at a spinning target to the east. Fern nailed a moving dummy with a snapshot to the shoulder. Clear left, he called. Right still hot. Sark replied from his position. The drill ended with a whistle. Inigo stepped into the clearing from behind a bush, his rifle slung casually across his back. Squad Saber, 2 simulated casualties. 1 delay in evac. Rear gunner on vehicle 2 failed to provide covering fire during Merrill's extraction. He looked to Leo. Leo winced. I didn't see the signal. I was watching the target behind. You don't watch in combat, Inigo cut in. You scan. You anticipate. You cover your team or they die. That's your burden. Lyra stepped in. Still, faster response than yesterday. That dummy was pulled in under 12 seconds. Coordination was better. Better isn't enough, Inigo said. Again. They ran the drill 4 more times, changing squad leaders each round. Brenna rode as driver on the third, gunning the JLTV around a curve fast enough to knock a spinning target off its stake without a shot. Hal performed a simulated casualty extraction using only one arm, after Lyra tied the other behind his back for injury realism. You could have warned me, he complained. You won't get warnings in the field, she said simply. Sark, while dismounting, slipped in the mud and landed squarely on his tailbone. No one laughed, at least not until Inigo walked past and dryly commented, "At least now you know what it feels like to get thrown by recoil." By midday the recruits were soaked in sweat, panting and bruised from their own gear. But they kept going. After a short rest, the next lesson began. Fire and move tactics from the back of a moving JLTV. This time, Inigo drove while trainees fired from the rear seats at pop-up targets triggered remotely by Lyra. Brenna was first. She braced her elbow tight against the door and fired in short, controlled bursts as Inigo sped past a series of straw dummies lining the course. The vehicle jolted with each bump, but she didn't flinch. 3 targets. 3 hits. Inigo gave her a nod. "You're clearing corners next time." Hal followed next. His first 2 rounds struck high, but he corrected and landed the third solidly through a target's shoulder. Meryl surprisingly performed the best of the group. Focused, precise, and silent, she fired 3 shots in rhythm with the JLTV's jolting motion. All 3 struck center mass. "Nice grouping," Lyra noted. "You've been practicing." "I hate missing," Meryl replied softly. By late afternoon, Inigo pulled the last of them into a huddle near the vehicles. They were exhausted, dirt-smeared, paint-splattered and scraped raw in some places. But they stood tall. "You're no longer passengers," he said. "You're operators. You drive. You shoot. You extract. You win. That's the new standard." He gestured behind him where the JLTVs sat idling in the dying light. "They won't save you. They won't fight for you. But they'll give you the edge if you earn it." No one spoke. Brenna finally broke the silence. "When do we train against real moving targets?" Inigo gave a rare, grim smile. "Soon." That night the trainees barely spoke around the fire. Their hands were too sore to clean rifles. Their arms too tired to lift mugs with ease. But there was pride in their silence. Earned, not given. They were no longer just learning how to fight. They were learning how to survive as a unit. The 5th morning broke quiet. Not with Inigo's usual sharp commands or the sound of rifles being racked and loaded, but with the soft hum of birdsong, drifting through the trees above a camp that for once was not preparing for war. The recruits stirred slowly, blinking against the sunlight that filtered through the canopy in scattered gold. There was no bell. No drills. Just the scent of firewood and the faint, unfamiliar aroma of something sweet. Hal sat up groggily. "Is that bread?" "It smells like honey," Brenna mumbled from her cot, already pulling on her boots out of habit. But before anyone could fully fall into the rhythm of training, a new sound cut through the camp. Laughter. Lyra's. They turned to see her near the supply tent, holding a wooden tray with warm loaves and jars of wildberry jam. She wasn't in her usual half-armor or jacket, but a light tunic rolled at the sleeves. There was a glint in her eye that none of them had seen before. Inigo appeared next, carrying 2 more baskets. One with fruit, another with salted meat and hard cheese. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't scowling either. "We're not fighting today," he said, setting the baskets down beside a rolled blanket. "You've earned a reprieve." For a moment no one moved. They looked to one another as if uncertain. Meryl, ever cautious, asked, "This isn't a test?" Lyra laughed again. "No ambushes, no dummies, no drills. Just a meal and a little sun." "You've survived the first week," Inigo added. "And more importantly, you didn't kill each other. That's worth something." A stunned silence followed, then a ripple of quiet cheers as the tension finally cracked. Fern clapped Sark on the back and even Leo managed a grin. Within the hour the clearing near the East Ridge had been transformed. Bedrolls were dragged out to form makeshift picnic mats. Helmets were set aside. Rifles were stacked neatly in a rack, still within reach but for once untouched. They ate. The bread was dense but warm, its crust softened with fresh butter Lyra had bartered from a traveling merchant 2 days prior. The jam was wild and tart, bursting with flavor. Some of the recruits had never tasted anything like it. "I thought berries were only for nobles," Fern said, licking his fingers. "That's what the nobles want you to think," Lyra replied dryly, tossing him another slice. Brenna sat beside Meryl and Leo, the 3 of them sharing a hunk of cheese between them with crude wooden knives. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Leo said. "What does?" Meryl asked. "Not being sore. Not hearing Inigo shout. Just sitting." Brenna took a bite of salted meat and chewed thoughtfully. "Yeah. It feels like something's waiting to happen. It always is, Hal said, joining them with a jug of boiled cider. But it won't happen today. Not far off, Sark and Fern had taken it upon themselves to build a small fire ring, roasting wild mushrooms they'd foraged the day before. The scent drifted across the clearing, drawing a few more toward their improvised kitchen. Even Inigo sat cross-legged beneath a tree, watching the recruits talk, laugh, and eat with a stillness in his eyes. Lyra joined him, offering a flask. He shook his head. Not yet. You think we're making them too soft? No, Inigo said. But I think they've forgotten what it feels like to be human. Today is about remembering. Lyra leaned back, eyes toward the sky. I used to dream about days like this. Before the fall. Inigo didn't reply, but she noticed his gaze linger on Brenna and Meryl, how they leaned into each other slightly as they laughed at some joke Leo made. On Hal, pouring cider into shared cups without a word. On Sark, blowing on a too-hot mushroom and nearly dropping it into the fire while Fern howled with laughter. You're thinking about the next step already, aren't you? Lyra said, narrowing her eyes. Inigo looked away. Always. He tossed a berry at his chest. Just eat something before you start plotting another battlefield in your head. He caught it reluctantly and bit down. By midday the clearing was alive with motion, but none of it martial. Some had dozed off in the sun, others chased each other around like children. Mock wrestling, climbing trees, even starting a round of some old village card game with rocks and carved tokens. Hal watched Sark trying to teach Fern how to juggle 3 apples, only for one to bounce off his forehead and land in the mud. 10 points for the mud, Leo laughed. You throw like a troll. Fern complained. I am a troll, remember? Sark replied with a grin, flexing his thick arms. Nearby, Lyra had set up a small table of parchment and ink. Those who could write were encouraged to jot notes, thoughts about the week, memories, or even messages to loved ones they might never see again. Meryl sat quietly, drawing something, perhaps a sketch of the forest. Inigo didn't ask. Instead, he walked to the edge of the clearing where the 2 JLTVs sat under a shade net. He placed a hand on the hood of one, listening to the slight tick of the cooling engine. They still had far to go. But he had seen what he needed. When the next drill came, when real bullets flew and real screams echoed through the trees, these recruits might just hold. Just might. Instructor, Brenna's voice came from behind. He turned. She handed him a wooden cup. Apple cider. Not bad, actually. Thanks, he said, taking it. Brenna hesitated, then asked, why now? The break, I mean. You've gone 3 days without losing discipline, Inigo said. You followed orders. Adapted under fire. Learned from failure. If you didn't rest today, tomorrow you'd start making mistakes. Brenna nodded slowly. I thought rest was weakness. Rest is preparation, Inigo replied. If you're dead tired, you'll die for real. She took that in, then gave a small smile. Glad we earned it. As she turned to leave, Inigo looked at the cider in his hand. It was cold now, but he drank anyway. Behind him, the sound of laughter rolled across the clearing again. He allowed himself a breath. But that would have to be enough. As the afternoon sun tilted westward, long shadows crept across the clearing. The laughter didn't stop, but it mellowed, like the warmth of the day had begun to sink into everyone's bones. There was a calm, rare and precious, that settled over the group like a warm blanket. Inigo walked the edge of the field, taking quiet stock. The air smelled of moss, cider and smoke. Not gunpowder. Not sweat or oil. Just clean living earth. He stopped near the tree where Meryl sat cross-legged, sketching with surprising focus. Her charcoal lines traced the curve of the tree line, with faint outlines of JLTVs behind the picnic setup. You draw? He asked. Meryl looked up, startled, then nodded. My older brother taught me. Before he left. Soldier. Hunter, she said. Didn't come back from the Wormwoods. Inigo said nothing for a moment. You've got an eye. Keep sketching. Even if war comes, it's good to remember what peace looks like. She blinked at that. Yes, instructor. But her hand trembled just slightly as she went back to drawing. Not far off, Hal and Fern had built a small throwing range using stacked logs. They were competing to see who could toss small river stones closest to a wooden cup without knocking it over. Leo cheered each near miss like it was a festival game. Brenna sat at the base of a thick oak with Lyra beside her. The two passed a flask back and forth. Nothing strong, just cooled herbal tea, but the moment still felt sacred. I'm starting to forget what life was before all this, Brenna murmured. You'll remember, Lyra said. The trick is not letting this, she gestured toward the gel TVs, the rifles, the drills, become the only thing that defines you. Easy for you to say. You still smile. Lyra chuckled softly. I don't smile because it's easy. I smile so I don't break. That silenced Brenna for a moment. She looked up at the sky, cloudless and blue, and said, Do you think we'll survive what's coming? I think you're tougher than you realize, Lyra said. All of you. Inigo watched from a distance. Not with suspicion or judgment, but with a quiet sort of pride. They were still rough. Still green. But no longer strangers. Something had begun to knit between them, a shared rhythm, a quiet trust. It wasn't the same as battle-hardened experience, but it was a foundation. And that was enough. He turned and walked to the supply tent. Inside, tucked beneath crates of training paint rounds and cleaning kits, he retrieved something he'd been saving. A small wooden chest, carved with simple flower motifs along the lid. He opened it and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside, a hand-carved board, flat stones in 2 shades, and a set of handwritten rule sheets. Go. The strategy game had been a gift from an old friend, now long dead. But the game itself? It still taught discipline, foresight, risk, patience. He carried it back to the fire and placed it between Sark and Leo, who were trying to outbrag each other about yesterday's marksmanship scores. What's this? Sark asked, raising an eyebrow. A challenge, Inigo said. You win. You pick tomorrow's meal. You lose. You're on firewood duty. Leo rubbed his hands. Easy. I'm good at games. No, Inigo said flatly. You're good at talking. Let's see if your brain keeps up. He set down the board. The first round began with careful moves, hesitant hands, and too many mistakes. But before long the game quieted them, forced them to think, to watch, to plan. Brenna and Meryl soon joined to watch. So did Fern, chewing on a sprig of mint. Lyra, meanwhile, had lit a second fire, this one just for warmth. She pulled a small lute from her pack. No one had seen her bring it before. Her fingers plucked a slow, wandering melody, nothing grand, just a tune of home. It was enough to make the clearing feel like another world entirely. As dusk settled in, someone, no one remembered who, started humming. Then Hal, voice uncertain, joined in with a half-forgotten camp song. The rest followed, not in harmony but not far off. Down by the river where the fireflies fade, we laid our dreams on silver blades. Even Inigo didn't stop them. Even Inigo for once just listened. Night deepened. Stars blinked to life, scattering across the sky like powdered glass. The moon had not yet risen and the world was dark but calm. They told stories. Not of battle but of childhood. Of the time Sark fell off a hay cart trying to impress a girl. Of Brenna's prank war with her older brother. Of Meryl's failed attempt to bake bread that ended in a flour explosion. Laughter rippled through the firelight again and again. Do you miss your world? Lyra asked Inigo quietly when the others had gone quiet. He looked up at the stars. It's not about missing, he said. It's about remembering why I came here in the first place. Why I stayed. And why did you? He turned to look at her. Because I had the chance to change something. Lyra didn't press. Just nodded and plucked a quiet note from her lute. By the time the fire had burned low, most had dozed off beneath blankets or leaned against logs half asleep. Only Inigo, Lyra, and Meryl still sat upright. Meryl passed the sketchbook to Inigo. On the final page she had drawn the clearing, not in perfect detail but enough to see each of them. Laughing, eating, sleeping. The jail TVs stood in the background like ancient beasts. This is what I want to remember, she whispered. He nodded. We'll make sure you can. And when they all awoke the next morning to the sharp bark of, gear up, they didn't groan. They didn't complain. Because something had changed. The bruises, the sweat, the drills, they weren't just training anymore. They were becoming a family. And though none of them would say it aloud, they all knew deep down. This was the last peaceful night they might have for a long, long time. The peace of the previous night lingered only a few hours into dawn. By the time the sun had risen past the mist, the clearing had already changed. Blankets were folded, fire pits cold. The warmth of yesterday had been replaced by the crisp edge of anticipation. Inigo stood before the recruits with a canvas tarp spread out behind him. Most of them were still rubbing the sleep from their eyes, adjusting belts and armor, whispering guesses about what the day might bring. "I see you've recovered," Inigo said flatly, folding his arms. "Good. Because today's no picnic." He stepped aside and yanked the tarp away. Beneath it lay a weapon none of them had seen before. It was larger than the rifles they trained with, bristling with a long barrel, bipod legs folded underneath, and a boxy feed port. Matte black and built like it could bite. The air grew still. "What is that?" Brenna asked, her voice quiet but steady. Inigo didn't answer immediately. He reached down, lifted the weapon with both hands and set it atop a waist-high crate. "M249 squad automatic weapon," he said. "Belt-fed. Gas-operated. Capable of sustained fire. Fires the same rounds as your rifles. But faster. Louder. Angrier." He stepped back and let the silence settle again. "This is the first one. You only get one for now. So we're assigning it to someone who can handle the responsibility." The recruits looked around at one another, some hopeful, others wary. Inigo scanned their faces slowly, then pointed. "Meryl." Everyone blinked. Even Meryl. "Me. You've got steady hands. Good instincts. You don't flinch under pressure and you don't waste ammo. You've proven reliable under fire and calm under chaos." He paused. "And most importantly, I trust you to know when not to use it." Meryl stepped forward slowly. Her arms tensed as she approached the crate, looking at the weapon like it might bite. Inigo gave her a short nod. "Go on." She reached down and gripped the handles. It was heavy, heavier than anything she'd fired before, but not unmanageable. It settled against her vest like a stubborn animal waiting to be broken in. "How does it feed?" she asked. Inigo motioned to a wooden box beside the crate. "Linked belts. Each belt holds 100 rounds. You'll fire in controlled bursts unless I say otherwise. Your job is suppression. Keep heads down, stop flanks, and control the tempo." He turned to the others. "The rest of you support her. She's not a hero. She's a node in the team. If she gets hit, you don't leave her behind, you protect the gun and the gunner." He began pacing. "Today's drills are centered around the M249. Room clearing. Open field suppression. Defensive holds. We'll run through it all. Brenna, Hal, Furren, you'll rotate as assistant gunners, helping with reloads and spotting targets." He clapped once. "Form up." They moved quickly now, no hesitation. The group was beginning to understand rhythm, what Inigo called combat flow. Even Leo, who still joked too much, was sharper on his feet. The first exercise began with a mock defense line. Crates stacked like cover, logs forming an improvised barricade. At one end, Meryl and Fern set up with the saw. The others formed two flanking fire teams. "Scenario," Lyra called out from her perch near the hill. "Bandits breaching your perimeter. 10 targets. Moving fast. Hit them before they overrun your position." Inigo raised a hand, then dropped it. "Begin." Paper silhouettes sprang up on poles, sliding along ropes through the tree line. "Contact!" Meryl shouted. The saw roared. It was not like the others. The bark of the M4S carbines was sharp, punchy, like hammers on iron. But the M249 was something else. A deep, rolling thunder, a BRRRT of controlled devastation that echoed across the clearing. 3 silhouettes dropped instantly. Fern slapped in another belt. Reloading. Meryl kept the weapon braced, pivoting slightly, keeping her bursts tight and deliberate. Target right. Moving fast. Sark and Hal fired in sync, catching it before it vanished behind the logs. Brenna, on the far left, called out positions. 2 more, east line. Low crawl. Meryl adjusted and fired again. This time she overshot. Too high. Inigo barked. She adjusted her grip. Reacquiring, firing. 2 more targets fell. By the end of the drill, only 1 silhouette remained, caught on its line, swinging aimlessly. "Cease," Fire called. The clearing quieted. Smoke drifted lazily from the saw's barrel. Meryl's cheeks were flushed, her hair damp with sweat, but her eyes were sharp. "Well done," Inigo said. "Faster reloads next time." Fern, that second belt jammed. You didn't check the feed line. Fern winced. Yes, instructor. He nodded once. That's why we drill. They ran the exercise again, this time with Hal as the assistant gunner and Brenna coordinating from the rear. The targets came faster. Some were paired to simulate charging attackers. One had a paint pouch strapped to its chest that exploded red when hit, signaling a confirmed kill. Meryl's aim was improving with every run. She learned to fire in short bursts, to manage recoil with a subtle lean forward, to let the barrel do the work instead of muscling it. She even began calling her own reloads. Belt out. Reloading. And Hal, calmer than Fern, had the second belt in before Inigo could even step in. After 3 rounds, Inigo signaled a pause. Reset, he said. While Lyra replaced targets, the recruits gathered under the shaded edge of the clearing. Meryl drank deeply from a flask, arms aching. Lyra approached her, eyes curious. What's it feel like? Meryl shrugged. Like holding lightning. Except you have to point it somewhere or it bites back. That drew a chuckle from Sark. You looked like a war goddess out there, he said. Remind me never to make you angry. Meryl gave him a tired but proud grin. Just don't forget the belts next time. Inigo returned with 2 more weapon crates, smaller this time. He placed them down and opened them both. One holds replacement barrels. The other holds spare belts and feed trays. This machine gun will overheat fast if misused. So later this week, we practice barrel changes mid-combat. He gave Meryl a look. You're learning. But this isn't just about gunning things down. The real value of a saw is control, denying space, cutting off advance, breaking momentum. He scanned the others. That's why she can't do it alone. You flank. You draw fire. You help her reposition. That's what this afternoon's drill is for, mobile fire support. Lyra stepped forward. We've marked a course in the woods. Tight paths, elevation shifts, ambush zones. You'll advance with the SAW team while clearing hostiles and repositioning after each burst. In pairs, Inigo added. Rotation every contact. The recruits exchanged glances, half excited, half dreading the next test. But none of them backed down. Meryl slung the saw over her shoulder again. Let's see how it runs in the woods, she said. Inigo nodded approvingly. Gear up. You've got thunder in your hands now. The trees swallowed them whole. Gone was the open clearing, the sun, the comfort of distant laughter. In its place, thick trunks, uneven ground, and the smell of wet loam and pine. Shadows shifted with every step. The trail ahead narrowed into a tight path barely wide enough for 2. Inigo led them in silence, hand raised for halts, eyes sweeping left and right. He wasn't treating this like training anymore. He was treating it like war. Listen, he said, voice low. The saw is powerful, but it's loud, heavy, and slow to reposition. That means we adapt the rest of our team to protect it. Meryl, the gun slung across her chest, looked grim but steady. Brenna moved beside her as assistant gunner, a belt of linked rounds draped over one shoulder like a sash. Hal and Sark followed as forward scouts, with Lyra and Leo trailing behind to close gaps and cover rear flanks. The objective, Inigo continued, is to advance through these woods while maintaining fire superiority at all times. We've rigged targets. When you see them, you engage as a unit. If Meryl opens up, you cover her reposition. If she goes silent, you fill the gap. He stopped at a red-marked tree. This is your start point. Targets are hidden throughout. Once you spot the first, the clock starts. I'll be following behind. They nodded. No jokes from Leo. No teasing from Sark. Just quiet readiness. Go. The woods came alive. The first target popped from behind a stump, painted with blue and yellow to simulate enemy colors. Contact left. Hal shouted. Brenna ducked low and uncoiled the belt from her shoulder. Meryl braced the saw against a mossy rock and fired in a short burst, 3 rounds, crisp and centered. The target dropped. Sark swept right, flanking through brush, eyes scanning. Clear on this side. Moving. Meryl said. They shifted, each movement covered. Hal leapt ahead, Brenna fed the next belt, and Meryl's boots sank into mud with each step, but she didn't stumble. The next 2 targets came fast. One from a treetop rope line, simulating an archer. Another rolled down a slope like a charging beast. The saw barked again, longer this time. Ease up. Inigo called from behind. Shorter bursts. Barrels running hot. Meryl gritted her teeth and lifted her finger. Smoke hissed from the barrel. Brenna, she called. Brenna was already there, gloves on, unscrewing the latch and rotating the hot barrel off the mount. Steam rose in the cold morning air as she replaced it with the spare Inigo had made her carry. Back online. Meryl called out. They pressed forward. This time the terrain dipped, forming a shallow gully. Sark stepped too hard and slipped. Down. Leo called. Help him. Meryl shouted. Leo pulled Sark up, dragging him behind a rotted log as Brenna returned fire with her carbine, sending paint rounds pinging off bark. Suppressing. Meryl yelled, letting loose another burst. The thunder cracked through the forest. Birds fled from the treetops. By the time they cleared the gully, Hal was limping slightly from a bad landing. Inigo whistled. End of route. Regroup here. They collapsed behind a fallen oak. Meryl dropped to one knee, chest heaving, face flushed. Lyra handed her a canteen. You're burning fast, she said gently. Meryl nodded. Harder than it looks. Holding the line and watching everything else. You're doing fine, Inigo said, joining them. But we're going to run it again. Groans but not complaints. He crouched beside Meryl. This isn't about being perfect. It's about becoming the anchor. You're the point around which the team rotates. The pressure doesn't go away, but you get stronger under it. She nodded again, slower this time. Yes, instructor. He looked to Brenna. Your reload was solid. Watch your transitions. Twice you hesitated during cover fire. Understood, she replied. To the rest, clear communication. You shout targets, you call movements. Silence is death. They reset. Rested. Then went again. This time with Lyra as assistant gunner, her hands practiced from watching every move. Then Leo. And Hal, despite the limp, insisted on trying once, determined to prove himself. They rotated, they failed, they improved. By noon they had made it through the course 4 times, shaving off nearly a minute each run. Meryl was still the best shot with the saw, but now she wasn't alone. Each teammate had felt the weight, the heat, the responsibility. It had changed them. And Inigo knew that was the point. Not to master the weapon, but to understand it, to respect it, to become part of something greater than fear. They broke under a shaded grove near a shallow creek. Lyra sat on a boulder, pulling grass from her hair. You know, when you said forest drills, I imagined something less murderous. Sark groaned and rolled over. I'm going to sleep for 3 days after this. Leo was already snoozing on a patch of moss, mouth slightly open. Meryl sat with the saw beside her, carefully wiping it down with a cloth. Brenna handed her a fresh rag, then leaned back against the tree. Do you think I could carry it one day? She asked. Meryl looked surprised. You want to? Brenna shrugged. I think I want to try. You made it look like more than just a weapon. Meryl smiled. You'll get your chance. A few feet away, Inigo had removed his gloves and was scribbling notes in a leather-bound book. Adjustments to formation, barrel rotation time, reaction drills. Lyra leaned in over his shoulder. You push them hard, she said softly. They need to be pushed. And when do you let them breathe? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, when they're strong enough to stand without me holding them up. She looked at him a moment longer, then nodded and stood. Then I'll keep watching. And I'll tell you when it's time. He gave a faint smirk. Fair deal. The recruits were quiet now. Some napped, some stretched, others simply stared into the swaying trees. The saw lay across Meryl's lap like a sword resting after a long duel. Inigo stood and clapped once. They groaned, but they stood. Even Leo. Afternoon drills. 2-man holds and retreat maneuvers. Your legs will hate me by nightfall. You said that yesterday, Sark muttered. And I was right, Inigo replied. Let's go. They moved. And the thunder followed.